Welcome to Shadowline News. I am bringing you a critical analysis of a pivotal moment in Kenya's democratic journey. As thousands of young Kenyans take to the streets to mark the first anniversary of the deadly June 25, 2024 Gen Z protests, the intervention of former Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i has introduced a new dynamic that could reshape the relationship between government authority and youth activism in East Africa's most stable democracy. The significance of this anniversary cannot be overstated. 1 year ago today, Generation Z protesters breached Parliament and set part of the building ablaze after members of Parliament passed the controversial Finance Bill 2024. The violence and chaos that followed marked a turning point in Kenyan politics, demonstrating that traditional political gatekeepers no longer held exclusive power over mass mobilization. These protests rejected the logic of ethnic patronage and elite negotiation that has dominated Kenyan politics since independence. What makes today's developments particularly intriguing is the prominent role of Fred Matiang'i, the former Interior Cabinet Secretary, who once commanded the very security forces now facing renewed protests. His call for restraint from government and security forces represents a remarkable political evolution. This is the same official who previously oversaw controversial security operations and was often criticized for heavy-handed responses to civil unrest. His transformation into an advocate for protesters' rights signals a broader shift in Kenya's political landscape. The context surrounding these anniversary protests extends beyond commemorating past events. The case of Albert Ojwang, a blogger and teacher whose death in police custody has galvanized public anger, demonstrates that the grievances that drove the original protests remain unresolved. Ojwang was arrested after publishing posts exposing high-level corruption in the police force, specifically targeting a senior officer. His subsequent death while in custody has become a symbol of ongoing state impunity and the dangers faced by those who dare to speak truth to power. The government's response to the anniversary protests reveals deep anxiety about the potential for renewed mass mobilization. State House and Parliament have been ring-fenced with razor wire, accompanied by heavy security deployment. This fortress mentality suggests that the current administration views the Gen Z movement as an existential threat rather than a legitimate expression of democratic dissent. Such heavy-handed security measures often become self-fulfilling prophecies, creating the very confrontations they seek to prevent. Matiang'i's intervention carries particular weight because of his intimate knowledge of security operations and his credibility with both sides of the political divide. When he urges restraint from security forces, he speaks with the authority of someone who has commanded those same forces. His statement that thousands of young Kenyans are taking to the streets acknowledges the scale and legitimacy of the movement, while positioning himself as a voice of moderation and democratic values. The broader implications of these developments extend far beyond Kenya's borders. The 2024 Gen Z protests represented a new model of political organization that bypassed traditional structures of political parties, non-governmental organizations, and foreign donor influence. This model has inspired similar movements across East Africa, creating what some observers call a regional wave of youth-led political awakening focused on economic justice and dignity. The timing of these anniversary protests is particularly significant given the economic challenges facing Kenya. The finance bill that sparked the original protests was designed to increase government revenue through various taxes and fees that disproportionately affected young people and middle-class families. 1 year later, many of those economic pressures have intensified rather than diminished, providing fresh grievances to fuel continued activism. The role of social media and digital organizing in sustaining this movement cannot be understated. The case of Albert Ojwang illustrates both the power and the risks of online activism. His blog posts exposing police corruption reached audiences that traditional media might never have accessed, but they also made him a target for retaliation. This dynamic reflects a broader tension between digital democracy and state control that is playing out across Africa. What makes the current situation particularly volatile is the intersection of unresolved grievances from the original protests with new cases of alleged state overreach. The death of Albert Ojwang provides a fresh focal point for anger, while the anniversary creates a natural moment for reflection and renewed mobilization. This combination of commemorative sentiment and contemporary grievance creates powerful emotional dynamics that can be difficult to control or predict. The international dimension of these protests should not be overlooked. Kenya's stability and democratic credentials are closely watched by international partners and investors. Excessive use of force against protesters could damage Kenya's reputation and potentially affect its access to international markets and development assistance. This external pressure provides additional incentives for moderation and restraint. The emergence of Fred Matiang'i as a voice for protesters' rights also reflects broader changes in Kenya's political elite. As the country approaches future electoral cycles, politicians are calculating how to position themselves relative to the youth movement that demonstrated its power to disrupt conventional politics. Matiang'i's stance may represent an early attempt to build bridges with a constituency that could prove decisive in future elections. Looking ahead, the success or failure of these anniversary protests in maintaining peaceful character will likely influence the trajectory of youth activism in Kenya and across the region. If the protests proceed without major violence, it could establish a precedent for how democratic societies can accommodate and channel youth dissent. If they devolve into confrontation, it could provide justification for more repressive responses to future activism. The broader question facing Kenya is whether its democratic institutions can evolve to accommodate the new forms of political expression that emerged from the Gen Z protests. Traditional mechanisms of political participation, including elections and party politics, have proven inadequate for addressing the concerns that drove young people into the streets. The challenge is creating new channels for youth engagement that preserve democratic stability while allowing for meaningful change. This is Shadowline News, bringing you the analysis that matters when democracy faces its greatest tests. We will continue monitoring these developments and their implications for Kenya's democratic future and the broader East African region. Thank you for trusting us to decode the stories that shape our continent's political landscape.